Good morning, and nice to see you all. We are now, as last week we talked about the counting of the Omer and everything related to that. So today I want to talk about another aspect of the period of time that we find ourselves in, which is these 49 days between Pesach and Shavuos, between the holidays of Passover and Shavuot, which we count to 49 days. But these days are known in the Jewish tradition as days of mourning. We mourn not with such severity as when we mourn the destruction of the temple during the 3 weeks in the summer when we fast on Tisha B'Av and we do that. In this case, we mourn, it's a little lighter. We're not allowed to make weddings during these 6-7 weeks. And other things, listen to live music. Some don't even listen to recorded music. But it's a time of mourning. We don't cut our hair during these 7 weeks. And the reason for this is because of a terrible tragedy that took place many, many years ago, about in the times of Rabbi Akiva. The famous sage Rabbi Akiva. We're told that a terrible epidemic or a plague broke out, and 24,000 of his students all died during this period of time. It was a very, very traumatic and devastating tragedy for which the whole Jewish people took upon themselves a national time of mourning forever, till Mashiach comes, because of how devastating this was and a blow to the Jewish people. So what I want to do today is explain this phenomenon, this event, the history of it, and the spiritual side of it, and the lessons of it. So let me first start with Rabbi Akiva. Who was Rabbi Akiva? Because we're talking about his students. So Rabbi Akiva has a very interesting story. I'll give you a little brief history on him himself, to give us a little backdrop to his story. Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd and knew nothing. He was a very simple shepherd. He was a convert, a son of a convert, or a grandson of a convert. He came from converts. Until he was 40 years old, he knew nothing. He didn't know how to read Hebrew. Until he was 40. But he was a pious person. However, he developed a very disliking to the sages, believe it or not. He had a very bad attitude towards the sages. And one day, the story goes that he was walking with his flock, with his sheep, and he came upon a body of water, and he saw that there was like the water would drip from a high place down. It would drip off a cliff. Onto a rock. And the rock, he saw that the drips, one after the other, was eventually penetrated the rock. He saw that the rock had an indent from the water. So he realized that obviously that takes years and years and years for that to happen, for just one drip at a time. But he was very inspired by this, and he said to himself, if a drop of water, one after the other, even so little, but consistently, over so many years, can penetrate and break through a stone, then the waters of Torah, because the Torah is compared to water, so if I start learning, even little by little, drop after drop, eventually it will penetrate and pierce through my heart and my head. Because even though I know nothing, I'm not very capable, so he thought at least, he believed that that if he starts and he devotes himself to study, he will be able to acquire knowledge and change himself around. Now, Rabbi Akiva wasn't just an individual person. He has a whole story about his marriage as well. He was, when he was a young man, he fell in love with a girl. Fell in love. I don't know if that's the right word to say, but he met a young girl who was the daughter of a very, very wealthy Jew in Israel. This man's name was Kalba Savua, that was his name, and his daughter's name was Rachel. And they decided to get married. She saw in Rabbi Akiva, this very wonderful qualities. She saw right through him. She saw that he's destined to some greatness. She was a very pious girl, and she said, I'm going to marry him, even though he was a very, very simple nobody. His father-in-law, her father would never consider matching his daughter with this man. When she came to tell her father the good news that she found her soulmate, her father almost fainted. She says, no way, this is not happening. On my dead body is this going to happen. And she warned him. He warned her that if she goes through with this, he saw that she's determined. He warned her that if she goes through with this marriage, he will write her off and take her out of his will, and he will not have anything to do with them. He won't support them, nothing. She can forget about everything. She went through with the marriage, and the father-in-law, her father, kept his promise. He didn't give them anything. And he had nothing. He couldn't support her. He had no money. So they lived in a very poor hut. And they were starving and they had nothing. I mean, it was a very difficult life. To make the long story short, they stuck it through. And they would sleep on straw. They would eat dry bread if they had to get it. But it was literally a life of self-sacrifice. I mean, she gave everything up for him. When this happened with the stone, where he saw the drips in the stone and he developed a desire to go learn, he told his wife that he would like to go learn and by the sages in Jerusalem or in Yavne. At that time it was in a city called Yavne, I believe. And she told him, you can go. She gave him her whole permission, full permission, and don't worry, I'll be okay. And he went, and he left for 12 years. He went to study under Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai for 12 years. I believe it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Yeah, I think so. And he went for 12 years. And imagine those 12 years he acquired vast knowledge. And after 12 years, he came back home. As he approached his house, he heard a little bit of a commotion inside his house. And he overheard his wife having a conversation with one of her neighbors. You ever heard the story? No. You ever? He overheard her having a conversation. The conversation went like this. They told her the neighbors were always harassing her. What kind of a life do you live? What kind of a business is this? You let your husband leave for 12 years. Is this a life? I mean, you married him. You didn't... why does he leave like this? Why did you let him? I mean... So she said, and he overheard this behind the door, she said, if he would want to go for another 12 years, I would give him permission to go for another 12 years. Okay. So he turned around. He didn't even walk into his house. He turned around and left for another 12 years. We'll explain all this in a minute. And he went back. Eventually, after another 12 years, this time he became the great Rabbi Akiva already. And he amassed thousands and thousands of Jews and students came to learn from him.
Came back with 24,000
he came back
the second time.
He came back with his house with the 24,000 students.
And she was the daughter of
right.
the
rich man, the wealthy man.
The rich man,
yeah.
Akiva used to work for him.
I don't know if he worked for him. He worked for him.
Used to work for him. He fell in love with the daughter.
Right.
That's how they met.
Yeah.
And it could be, yeah. So when he came back the second time, the students asked who she came out of the house to greet him, and she felt, they believe it said that she bowed, prostrated, or she made some gesture of honor. So the students asked, who is this? And Rabbi Akiva was giving her back great honor. He was honoring her, so they asked her, who is she? So he turned and said, my Torah and your Torah all belongs to her. Because of her, we have all this. I was able to come. And now to explain simply, why didn't he go into his house the first time after 12 years? Why did he go in, say hello, and then go back to 12 years? He probably understood that if he went in, then he would probably stay, and he wouldn't go back. But, so those were the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. Now sages tell us, and obviously then, when his father-in-law realized who he became, so now he wanted to become friends with him again. Now it's an honor to be Rabbi Akiva's father-in-law. So they made up, and obviously everything changed and so on. But this is a man, this Rabbi Akiva, the Medrash tells us that to emphasize the greatness of Rabbi Akiva, who he was the greatest sage of Israel, if not of all time, but he's from those that the whole world stands on him. To emphasize this, the sages tell this following story, that when Moshe Rabbeinu was shown by God before he died, Hashem showed Moses the whole future of the Jewish people. And he showed him also Rabbi Akiva and his students studying. And Rabbi Akiva's erudition, his ability to delve into the words of the Torah, he was able to deduce from the crowns on the letters all kinds of hints and mystical knowledge. And even Moses didn't understand what Rabbi Akiva was teaching. So Moshe felt very weak. His heart weakened. There's someone that even knows more than me, and that's not that he was arrogant, God forbid. Moshe was humble, but he felt, weakened that here I am. I thought I had got the Torah from God, and look, 1,000 years later or more, 1,500 years later, there's a great sage that was able to delve even further than I had. So he felt very weakened by this, until he overheard a student ask Rabbi Akiva, how do you know this? Where is this from? Well, something to that nature, something to that effect. So Rabbi Akiva told him, this is a law passed down from Moses, straight from Moses. Moshe felt much better then. It's all based on him. That means it's all linked back to the Torah that was given at Mount Sinai through Moshe Rabbeinu. See, it says that he regained his strength. Mm-hmm. But that's who Rabbi Akiva was. He was able to excel in such a way that even Moshe Rabbeinu was able to learn from him. And Rabbi Akiva, it says, the whole Torah stands on him. The whole oral tradition, the whole oral Torah comes from him. So this is the great person we are. Now, Rabbi Akiva he had taught his students the following. It says in the Torah, there's 613 commandments in the Torah. One of those 613 commandments is, V'yahavta l'reacha kamecha, you shall love your fellow as yourself. Rabbi Akiva taught his students that one mitzvah is the main cardinal rule of the whole Torah.
Amen.
That's the whole Torah, and that's the basis of the whole Torah. Let's put it that way. Zek klal godel b'Torah. This is the cardinal rule of the Torah. So you would expect that such students would excel in that area. If you hear from your main teacher, from your lover, your master that you love so much, and you're learning from him all day and all night, he tells you that everything I'm teaching you, there's one mitzvah that you should know is the foundation of it all. And that is the mitzvah of Ahavat Yisrael, to love your fellow. But the Talmud tells us that the students of Rabbi Akiva all died because they did not honor and show respect and honor for each other. And because they were such holy people, so this was seen as an even greater offense. When such holy people fail, the failing is much more emphasized, is magnified. And because it was such a terrible offense that Hashem punished them so severely, and that this epidemic broke out and they all died. So the Rebbe asks, and many probably ask the question, how could this happen? Why indeed, if they are such holy Jews, as they were, the students of Rabbi Akiva they weren't kids, they were holy, holy souls. Mm-hmm. And not only were they holy souls, but their teacher was the holiest of all. And he taught them the great mitzvah that Rabbi Yisroel, to love your fellow as yourself, is the most important rule of the Torah.
And Rabbi.
So how is it that his students, so failed in such an important teaching of their very teacher? What was the question?
What is your definition, your personal definition, as to love your neighbor as yourself?
What does that mitzvah mean?
To you.
I'll tell you. I'll explain that in a minute. There are many definitions. I'd like to talk about that, but let me go in order. I'll get to that. To cite an example. Everyone over here, we all know the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Rabbi Milubavitch, everyone knows him. The Rebbe taught many things. I stood by hundreds of his Fabrengens. Thousands of hours I spent with listening to him. I listened to him for hours and hours and hours. But you would ask anyone, what's his, that one thing, if you had to summarize his whole teaching, what is it?
What was his?
I'm going to tell you. His thing was love, of course, but therefore, because you have to love your fellow Jew as yourself, so therefore, he believed that and love your fellows not only to help him physically, but to help him spiritually as well. So the Rebbe promoted helping every single Jew physically and spiritually. And based on that, we have thousands of shluchim, emissaries around the world, bringing Judaism to all Jews, not only Judaism, but everything.
Not only physically, but he emphasized
spiritually, to help a Yid put on tefillin, help them, bring them closer to God. And if they need yesterday, I was watching the news in Nepal. You know what happened in Nepal yesterday?
Yes.
You know that there's thousands of Israeli students over there. You know where they go when you know what's going on over there now? Where's the main center of connection, parents in Israel looking for their students?
My friend's son is there.
Looking for their children. You know where the center is? Chabad house in Nepal. It's all over the news. Mm-hmm. They don't call the foreign ministry in Israel. They're calling the embassy over there. They call Chabad house. And the shliach and his wife are on the news and calling parents, keeping connection, and sending emissaries to find bodies, or not bodies, hopefully survivors. Mm-hmm. You can't believe it. This is not spiritual help. This is physical help. This is what the Rebbe believed. This is what he did. This is what he promoted. Imagine, just to emphasize this, if the Rebbe sits and talks about this 40 years and promotes, go out and help a Jew go to a city and set up shop there and make synagogues and schools and whatever to help Jews spiritually and physically. And no one goes. Imagine that. No one goes. No one heeds his call. Imagine such a thing. He's speaking for 40 years about this. This is the main thing that he cares about. His chassidim that are sitting and listening to him go back to their business. They become jewelers. They become plumbers. They become grocery shop owners. They become everything but what he says to do. It would be astonishing, no? It would be astonishing. Here is a man that such stature speaks so much about one issue, and no one heeds the call. No one's listening. No one's going out and doing what he said. You wouldn't believe it. It wouldn't make any sense. It would be say there's something wrong with it. I'm not getting something here. Why are they not heeding this call? Of course, the Lubavitcher Chassidim did heed his call, but I'm giving you a scenario that you should understand the question over here regarding Rabbi Akiva's students. Here's a teacher for 24 years, or 12 years, those 12 years that he amassed all the students, has been promoting one thing mainly: love your fellow as yourself. And his 24,000 students, it's as if it fell on deaf ears, rolled off a duck's back. They don't hear it. They didn't absorb the teaching. Why not?
The most important
teaching they didn't listen to. They listen to everything else, how to keep Shabbos and all the different ways of understanding the law and so on, and everything that he taught. This one thing, they don't listen. How could that be? How could such a thing be? Imagine that the Rebbe would speak for 40 years or 10 years, 20 years about going out on shlichus, to go out and promote Judaism to the whole world, and no one does it. It wouldn't make any sense. It would be the most astonishing thing.
It didn't penetrate in you.
How could that be?
There
What
was
does that
no-
mean? Your teacher, you love him, you're devoted to him, your whole life is around him, and he talks, and he promotes an issue, one rule, one concept, and no one heeds the call. No one's taking him serious. It's so mind-boggling. The thing doesn't make sense. His very students didn't respect each other. How could that be? So the Rebbe takes a whole different view on this. He explains it as follows. He says like this: the students of Rabbi Akiva, they did take their teachers' lessons seriously. When they heard their teacher say, "Love your fellow as yourself," is the cardinal rule of the Torah, they took it very seriously. So he says like this. Imagine Rabbi Akiva is sitting right here, and he's teaching 100 students. I don't think he would teach 24,000 students at one time. It's impossible. But let's say there's 100 students around the table sitting and listening and drinking up his words. Trust me, they drank his words. They didn't just listen. They gobbled it up. They were so devoted, they were so holy. And he keeps telling them, within every lesson, he puts in the idea, love your fellow. And every lesson he puts it in. Just like the Rebbe. In every talk that he gave, he talked about love. Loving your fellow. Helping another Jew, spiritually and physically. That's all he talked about. That's not all he talked about, but every single talk that he gave, he's somehow got that in. Rabbi Akiva did the same probably. So they're listening to this. So now, imagine after he'd finished teaching a concept, let's say a deep erudition on the laws of mikveh, or the laws of kashrut, or whatever it is that he taught. It was deep, it was complicated, it was analytical. And the students went afterwards to probably review that teaching, right? You don't just listen once and you have it. Maybe they were on a higher level of wisdom, so they would probably be able to understand it with one listen, with one lecture. But they must have reviewed it, right? As is normal. So now they break out into groups, reviewing what they just heard from their teacher. So Yankel says, this is what the teacher meant about those laws. And Shmuel says something totally, no, I understood it differently. And Beryl says, no, it was a third understanding. He has a whole third understanding. And Levi understands it all. Everyone filtered their teacher, Rabbi Akiva's words, through their own brain, through their own intellectual capacity. So everyone came out understanding it somewhat, but based on their own processing. So it could very possibly be that at the end of the day, after reviewing everything, they all had a different understanding of what their teacher said on this particular law, on this particular subject. So what happens if you were devoted to your teacher and you were devoted to his teaching and you felt it important to understand everything your teacher taught you? And suddenly you find that your colleague understands it maybe not he understands it maybe completely different. What happens? What do you do? So if you don't love him like you love yourself, so you don't care, so he understands it different. What do I care how he understands it? I know what I understand. I know that I understand it well. I know that I absorbed his teaching well, and I'm going to live by it. What happens to him, who cares? But if you love your fellow as yourself, so now I see a colleague of mine, a student of this great Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva, who somehow misunderstood his teacher's teaching. Because I understood it. I'm convinced that I understood it correctly, right? Mm-hmm. And I hear that you went off on a tangent. You understood it very different than I did. So if I don't care about you, I leave you alone. What do I care? But if I care about you, and I care about my teacher, my Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva, that his teaching should be understood by all properly, then I'm going to go over to you and say, hey, sir, you understood it wrong. I heard what you said, and I don't think you're right. And you're going to do the same thing. You hear the way I understood it, and you care very much for me. You're going to say, hey, you don't have it right. And this caused a commotion. Because they loved each other so much, and they were so devoted to their teacher, it takes two things. You have to be devoted to your teacher, which they were, which means that they cared deeply that whatever Rabbi Akiva taught, should be received by everyone so that they can live by it. And I care about my fellow colleague as Rabbi Akiva taught me to care about everyone just like I care about myself, to love your fellow. So now I hear you understanding this wrong, as I understand it, right? You're wrong. The way you understood it is wrong. So what is my duty? I feel a duty to set you right, to make sure that you understand it the way I understood it, which I think is correct. In other words, what happened? So what happened? What ended up happening? And you felt the same way about me, that I'm wrong, and therefore you have to make sure that I get it right. So they all started discounting each other's understanding of Rabbi Akiva's teaching, because they felt, how can I let you go off on a tangent and go wrong? I can't. I love you so much. So it became an imperative that I make sure that everyone understood it the way I understood it, which I'm convinced is right. This caused, they didn't treat each other with proper respect. Because instead of recognizing, I understood it this way, because my filter, my brain processes information one way, but your brain is also a legitimate brain, and you process it the way you process it. So we can have a discussion, we can have a conversation, but I have to recognize at the end of the discussion that you have your perspective, and it may also be correct.
Free will.
Not so much a question of free will, but it's a question of everyone's mind processes, internalizes the same teaching, and they can both be right. They can both be correct. But that's where they lacked the respect for each other. It's not that they didn't love each other. On the contrary, they loved each other the way their teacher wanted them to love each other. And that's why they cared that you should know what their teacher taught, the way it should be taught, the way it should be understood. And they felt, and the one felt that the other didn't get it right. So they would pound on him, and they would make sure they would not harass him, but they would make sure that he understood it correctly. And in that way, they ended up not respecting each other properly.
So they failed to respect.
That was the failing. It wasn't a failing in their love. The love was unbounding. It was unlimited. Because they were students of Rabbi Akiva. The love was unlimited. That's why they cared so much about their fellow. That's why they cared so much to make sure that they understood properly what Rabbi Akiva was saying. I can tell you something. I know this from real life. The Rebbe would say a sikha, but give a farbrengen, let's say, and he would say something very important. You could see that he said it with great passion. It was important then. There were, let's say, a couple of thousand people listening to the farbrengen, and I know, I've seen this. A lot of times, one chassid understood it one way, and another chassid understood it completely different. And an argument would come, this would cause a certain, wait a minute, you're wrong. That's not what the Rebbe meant. I don't think you should do this. And this one said, no, I think this is what he meant. This is what we have to do. And it would cause, a lot of times, a little bit of a disagreement. Sometimes passionate disagreements. And that's what happened with Rabbi Akiva students as well. Maybe on a different level, but it happened. Because when your teacher is important to you, and your fellow chassid and fellow student is important to you, and you care so much, it's important for you to make sure that they don't veer off their teacher's track. And this happens a lot. But instead of understanding that perhaps someone else could understand it the way he understands it, it's also a legitimate approach. Rabbi Akiva's students did not allow for that. They didn't. That was the failing. That they thought it was the way I understood it was the right way, and someone else's perspective is not legitimate. And that was the failing. That's the covet. It doesn't say they didn't love each other. It says they didn't honor and respect each other. That's very different than not loving each other. The disrespect was a result of their incredible love for each other. You follow what I'm saying? Because Rabbi Akiva was their teacher, because they took him so serious, because they learned from him that love your fellow is so important, is the cardinal rule of the Torah, so they weren't going to let another Jew who they loved like they loved themselves misunderstand Rabbi Akiva's teaching. And they couldn't. The Rebbe goes a step further. He says each one understood Rabbi Akiva's teaching based on the source of their soul. Rabbi Akiva's students were general, they were holy souls, each one of them. So their souls were rooted in different midot, in the different attributes of Hashem. One was rooted, let's say, in the attribute of kindness, chesed. Another one's soul was rooted in the attribute of judgment. So that's how they would end up filtering and processing the teachings of Rabbi Akiva. One would end up with an approach of chesed, and one would end up with an approach of gvura, of more strict judgment. Different ways. It says, like, for example, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the two sages in the Torah, right, in the Talmud. They're always arguing. One says, on a certain thing you do it one way, and one says, no, you're not allowed to do that. How could it be? They're always arguing. So it's explained in Chassidus, the Hillel's soul, the souls of the students of Hillel all came from the attribute of chesed. That's why they were more kind in their rulings. Rabbi Beis Shammai's souls were all from the attribute of gvura, which is more strict. That's why they were more strict in their rulings. That's how it is. So the Rebbe explains with the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, the way they processed was based on the root of their soul. So they recognized, if this is coming from my soul, it must be true. So how could you understand it differently? But they didn't realize that your understanding also came from your soul, but your soul is rooted differently. So and because they loved so much, it's almost like you love someone to death, right? There's such a saying over here also. They loved someone so much that they didn't give that person space to have his own opinion, and that was the failing. Now I want to talk about your question.
Rabbi, what you're mentioning is that my belief is that we all are humans. And everything you just have said is we play a big part of egoistical in our lives, in the intellectual, in every way. My strongest belief is where we fail is in the compromise, because we don't come to compromise.
Right.
We are egoistical. Impetus is bigger than the compromise impetus. We would have compromised back then. If we would have compromised now, then we would really employ the love your neighbor.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Although
I would say that when it comes to the students of Rabbi Akiva, they were all tzaddikim, they were holy, righteous people. I wouldn't exactly say that they were egotistical. I think it came from a different place.
But we're all egotistical.
But some people are not. Some people have a bittul. Some people have they've overworked their ego.
Disagree with that. We really.
It says in that tzaddik is a person who has overcome his ego.
Abraham, very fair.
Well, yes.
Some
Abraham
people,
to me.
right? Yes.
Like Rabbi Akiva, for
exactly.
example.
But
Yes, his wife, Rachel.
He compromised.
Right, but it's not only compromise.
But now we all do that.
Not all, but Rabbi Akiva's students were holy people, so it's not just the ego. It was because of their care on the country. It was because they cared that led to this. Because they were really convinced that they understand what Rabbi Akiva said the way they understood it, the way it was processed through their soul, through their brains, through their filter. And that they wanted to impose, impose on someone else. And that was a failing, no question about it. And that's why they all were punished. But that's not because they lacked love. It's because they had love, a tremendous love. That because of their love they imposed. Anyway, regarding the question now, so that's why during these 7 weeks, because to commemorate this national tragedy, which almost caused that the whole, all the students, that's what, everyone, except for five. 5 of his students survived it, and they became the teachers of the next generation to maintain, to give over the Torah to the next generation. Imagine 5 people. One of them was the famous Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer. And he asked that his day of passing should become a national day of celebration, which it did. Lag BaOmer, it says the famous story of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, that he was fleeing from the Romans, as did Rabbi Akiva. The difference is Rabbi Akiva was caught by the Romans and he was tortured to death as one of the 10 martyrs that we read about in Yom Kippur. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai hid in a cave for 13 years, or for 12 years, and all the secrets of Kabbalah were taught to him then. And he lived there with his son, miraculously, and then he came out and he went in for another year. And that's where we have the Zohar, and the rest is history. But these 5 students perpetuated the teachings of Rabbi Akiva and of the whole Torah to the next generation. That's why we have today what we have. Regarding love, so the lesson from this is to increase in proper Ahavat Yisrael, love for your fellow as yourself in these days. Always, but especially in this period of time. That's the lesson. Now you ask me, what's the definition of love your fellow as yourself? So the truth is, I think most people today, Jews and even non-Jews, Christians and whoever, what have you, all quote that teaching from the Torah, from the Old Testament, from the Torah. And it's on everyone's tongue. Everyone says, love your fellow, love thy neighbor as thyself, right? That's a very famous teaching. But people don't stop a second to think, what does it really mean? Is it even possible to love someone else like you love yourself? What is the meaning of this mitzvah? It means if you're going to pay for your own vacation $10,000, you should start loving everyone as you love yourself and pay for everyone's vacation $10,000. That's like you would pay for your own vacation. If you're going to buy yourself a house for $500,000, you should start buying for everyone a house for $500,000 because you love them as you love yourself. So why should you pay for yourself and not pay for them if you love them as you love yourself? And the reason you're buying yourself a house is because you love yourself, so you should be buying everyone a house. What does this mean? How do you understand this mitzvah? Love thy neighbor as thy. It's very easy to say it, very different in actuality. So there's 2 ways you can build, there's different levels to this mitzvah. There's the thing that Hillel said, the great Hillel once said to a non-Jew who came to convert, and he asked him, teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one leg. You remember hearing that story?
Yes.
So what did Hillel tell him? He said, what you don't like done to you, don't do to someone else. What is madasoni alecha, what you hate done to you, don't do unto others. And that's the whole Torah, the rest is commentary. That's what he told him. So he didn't tell him love your fellow as yourself. He said it in a roundabout way. He said, whatever you don't want done to you, don't do to someone else. That's a basic thing. If you don't want someone to slap you in the face in the middle of the street, don't do that to someone else. And if you don't want someone to slap you in the face, even in the private, don't do that to someone else. And if you don't want to be insulted, don't insult anyone else. You don't want people to steal your money, don't steal from someone else. That's a basic. That's easy. That's much easier. It's much easier to understand that. What you don't want done to you, someone to yourself, don't do to someone else. Okay, I can appreciate that. But the truth is that the mitzvah says it in the positive. Love your fellow as you love yourself. So what does that mean? So let me give you a basic definition. A basic definition. There's a lot of definitions to this, but I'll give you a basic definition. Are you kind to yourself? Are you judgmental of yourself? Let's say when you do a bad thing. And we all do bad things here and there, right? We all sin. Right? After you sin, do you beat yourself up? You say, I'm a nobody, I'm no good, and I should... I'm not worth anything anymore, and I'm gone. You say that to yourself? No, you don't think of yourself as worthless after you sin. What do you think of yourself after you sin? You find excuses, right? You find excuses for yourself, whether they're legitimate or they're not legitimate. But you look for every way to find a way to say, maybe I'm not so much at fault. Right? You're very, very kind to yourself in that way. As the pasuk says, "Al kol pishayim techaseh ahava." Your self-love covers up all your failings, all your mistakes. You still love yourself after you failed. Don't judge. If you're going to be kind, you're going to cut yourself some slack. Cut someone else slack as well. When you see someone else fail, don't rush to judgment. Love him like you love yourself. How do you love yourself? Your love covers over all your failings. Let it cover someone else's failings also. Don't judge someone else so quickly. Just like you don't judge yourself. You know that you fail. You know that you fail. You know that you sin. But you love yourself so much that your sins are all covered up. You don't let them destroy your self-worth. Right? You're still worth something. You still want that you should be forgiven, right? Hashem should forgive you. Why should he forgive you your sin? Well, you say, I didn't really mean it, or even if I did mean it, it was a weak moment, whatever you come up, any excuse you come up, allow for someone else to have the same excuse, and find that excuse for someone else. But we don't do that. When we see someone else fail, we want him in jail either. We want him to get punished. We really want him to get punished, especially if he does a big sin. But you don't want yourself to get punished if you fail, right? It was the same thing. If you did the same thing, you would say, maybe I should go to jail. Or I'm going to go to the police and I'm going to put myself in jail. No one does that. Or no one's going to go now and belittle himself because he sinned in public. Don't belittle someone else. Why won't you do it to yourself? Because of your self-love. That's love someone else like you love yourself. It doesn't mean that you should start spending on everyone what you spend on yourself. That's not realistic. It's not even there's no need. There's no mitzvah to do that. There's no mitzvah to go buy everyone a house because you're buying yourself a house. There's no such mitzvah. That's not what love your fellow as yourself means. It means, and this is one definition, it means that the love that you extend yourself, which allows you to get away with all the failings, that love extend to someone else. Love him like you love yourself. How do you love yourself? You cut yourself slack here, right, left, and center. Because you love yourself. You're ready to forgive yourself. You're ready to say, I'm not so terrible. It's not my fault, or whatever. I'm this, that. You find excuses. Do the same for someone else. On a higher level, it can mean, as many, many Jews, the Holocaust was on everyone's mind last week, right? It was in Israel. They had it. You know how many stories there are in the Holocaust of people giving up everything that they had for someone else? People gave away their last piece of bread for someone else. And they would die and that person would live. Are you obligated to do that? No. Your life comes first. That's the law. But sometimes your love for someone else is so real, you're just incapable of seeing someone else suffer. You just can't see it. And therefore, you even love him more than you love yourself. Sometimes that can happen. It's not that you love him more than you love yourself. You can't see someone else suffer, and therefore you give him, you extend yourself, even if it means to your detriment. And there are thousands of such stories. Mm-hmm. So love your fellow as yourself. Let me tell you the Alter Rebbe's definition. You want the Alter Rebbe's definition?
Sure.
In Tanya he says like this. How could someone fulfill this mitzvah properly? I asked in the beginning, is this mitzvah even possible? This is one condition. First, let's understand, why should I love someone else as I love myself? You're supposed to love everyone. What does this mean? Let's try to understand it. You ever went on a plane? You went on a plane lately? You boarded a plane lately? You get onto a plane. You have 200 people on the plane. Are you supposed to love everyone in that plane like you love yourself? Let me ask you, the person that's sitting in back of you in the plane, do you even need him to want to love you? Do you want him to love you? Do you want everyone in the world to love you like they love themselves? It's a joke. It's not. It doesn't even mean anything. It's not realistic. It's not. What does that mean? I don't even need it. Do I need the whole world to love me like they love themselves?
No.
I don't need that. So obviously it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. I need the whole world to love me like I love myself. I go on a bus, I need all the people on the bus to love me.
Might be people you don't want them to love.
Whatever, even if they do, they're nice people. I don't need them to love me. I need them to respect me. I need them to treat me well. But I don't need them to love me. Love is reserved for family, for good friends. You need your family to love you. That I do. I need my sister, my brother to love me. I need my parents to love me. I need my close community to love me. I don't need this, every person in India to love me. It's ridiculous. And therefore there's no such mitzvah. There's no such mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe says that the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself, it's there. The Torah is trying to impress upon you that your fellow Jew is your family. Your fellow Jew is your family. It's a brother, it's a sister. A brother and a sister you have to love.
Brotherly love.
A brother you need to love. That's a need. That's a human need that your siblings should love you. So it says, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha," you shall love your fellow Jew as yourself. What the Torah is trying to tell you is to recognize that every Jew is your brother and sister. So the Alter Rebbe says, how is it possible that every person that lives in Netanya should be my brother and sister? Is that possible? I don't know them. What does it mean that my brother and my sister? I have different parents, I have different goals, I have different upbringing, I don't speak their language. We have nothing in common. What does it mean? Why are they my brother and my sister? So Alter Rebbe says like this. Every Yid has a neshama. What is a brother? What makes you a sibling? What are siblings? Siblings means that they share the same DNA. They come from the same set of parents. And because they share that same source, that same DNA, there's a natural love between them.
Connection.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. A Yid, every Jew who has a neshama, a godly soul, that's what makes them brothers. They share the same spiritual DNA. They share the same spiritual DNA. So the Alter Rebbe says, and this is real, this is no joke. They share the same spiritual DNA, just like two brothers share the same physical DNA. Two Jews share the same spiritual DNA. The problem is, he says like this, there's only one way you can really fulfill this mitzvah properly. If your life is your physical body, and that's what takes precedence in your life, he says there's no way you're going to be able to fulfill this mitzvah. Because my body is always going to be more important than someone else's body. My physical needs and my physical life is, if that's what I emphasize, it's not that I'm not your brother. That part of me is not your brother. I come from my parents and you come from your parents. And we may not even know each other. You come from different worlds. But if you allow for your body, your soul, to take, if you emphasize your soul more than your body, in other words, what's the main dynamic of your life is my neshama. If your main dynamic of your life is your neshama, and you recognize that Jew's neshama has the same DNA as yours, same spiritual DNA as yours, then you're capable of fulfilling this mitzvah. Because then you'll realize that this is your family. It's your brother, it's your sister. It's your brother and sister. And a brother and a sister you love. That's a natural thing to do, is to love your brother and sister. But the trick in Avos Yisrael is to realize that every Jew is your brother and sister. How do you realize that every Jew is your brother and sister? If you emphasize the neshama, if that becomes the main part of your life. And that's why we have the Torah. That's why the Torah is there. The Torah tells us this over and over, especially Chassidus. Over and over. The neshama, another yid, another yid. That's what the Rebbe talked about for 40 years. Why did he inspire such a phenomenon of a global Avis Yisrael that he did? Because he talked about this for 40 years. And the neshama of another yid is your brother. He pounded it, he knocked it into our heads. He didn't leave go for a second. It's not easy.
What's it called? Tikkun Olam, right?
Tikkun Olam is a different thing. That's for the whole world. To bring the whole world to Mashiach, to God.
It's
not
a
to Judaism,
too.
but to God.
To the Almighty.
But the idea of Avis Yisrael is only possible if your neshama is elevated above your physical. If that becomes the emphasis in your life. If it doesn't, then you'll never be able to fulfill this mitzvah properly. You'll be nice to them, you'll perhaps be kind, you'll extend yourself here and there, but it'll never be the way the Torah wants. So the mitzvah of Avis Yisrael means to recognize that every yid is your family. Because love is reserved for family. That's what love is. If it's not your family, you don't need them to love you. You don't have a need like that. You go onto a plane, I don't need the whole everyone on that plane loving me. I don't need it, and therefore there's no commandment for them to do it. I need my family to love me. And every yid is family. Because of the neshama, they share the same neshama source. In a way, in a certain aspect, all human beings share a common, what's it called? We're all in the image of God, but, the human soul is also in the image of God. But that's maybe on a different level. Very important as well, but maybe on a different level. When it comes to family, literally the same neshama source, that's a concept that every person has to recognize, and only then could they fulfill the mitzvah of Avis Yisrael. So back to the students of Rabbi Akiva. Their failing was not in Avis Yisrael. They were strong, they were great. But their failing was that they didn't give space to someone else's opinion. They imposed their opinion on someone else. It doesn't say they didn't love each other, it says they didn't respect each other. It's a very different problem. But for them it was a tremendous failing. Hashem wouldn't punish us so severely if we didn't respect each other, because we're not, we're on a lower level. At such a high level that was a great offense. We have to go daven, so we'll cut it here. And but the main thing is to work on this mitzvah of Avis Yisrael during these days.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a wonderful day.